Well, hello and welcome for joining us in the world. We have got 4 awesome change makers joining me today. They have been working very hard behind the scenes, and finally we get to celebrate them as they are launching their Changemaker podcast. So you're going to be introduced to each one of those, have an opportunity to say congratulations by adding your comments, and we'll make sure that I'll add those so that we can acknowledge you for being here. And it's a great time, I think, because so many of us in the world find ourselves that we're either isolated or restricted, and a podcast is such a great way to get our message out there. We've had a few technical difficulties, but you know what? As they say in showbiz, the show always goes on, even if we're sweating like mad behind the scenes. It's all good. It's all good. So first up, I really want to introduce you to Pix. Pix, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about what prompted you to want to start your podcast, which, as we know, is the COURAGEpreneur. Tell us a bit of the story behind the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, Anne-Marie, and congratulations to each of my fellow podcast hosts. I'm really excited. What prompted me really is my late dad. He always instilled communication into me, and I've actually had 3 life-threatening accidents, and that's not to impress you, simply to impress upon you that life is so precious. And it was the 3rd one when I really had that aha moment. It's like, not why did this happen to me? It's like, why did I survive this? And so it's been a long journey, and courtesy of COVID, I've had the beautiful opportunity to work with Anne-Marie, an incredible podcast host and also a mentor and branding expert. And I just had to get my message out there. And it's not only my message, it's a message of others, their courage journey, to go and give people hope and inspiration and courage, those that are suffering or going through adversity and abuse and tragedy and trauma, to go, wow, that's happened to them. I so hear them. If they can do it, I can do it. And I think everybody needs that little bit of hope and courage, and it is about developing your courage muscle. So that's why it's really an honour to Dad, and I will say in honour to my late nephew who, did take his life by suicide. So whilst that's a really tough topic, that's what my podcast is about. It's getting those conversations out there and normalising the conversations around the tough topics.
Yeah, so good, Pix. I know that you've launched a number of podcast episodes, but just for people who are looking for the kind of content that you're going to be sharing, share a little bit about some of the shows that they can expect to listen to and that may be already on accessible on the podcast stream.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to say that there's already a couple of episodes loaded. The first one, my first guest episode, is the amazing Michael Ray, who is one of 7 children, but also a father of 4. And he's got a beautiful daughter, Maddie, who's non-communicative. And the only way he could communicate with her is by smiling. And so he's got the Smile Project, and he is just an epitome of courage. He himself had suicidal thoughts, and he's just come through that. And then for our second guest episode, the amazing Rachel Beck, who is an Indian who lost her mum early, and then she was adopted by Jewish parents raised in America. So she's got a very courageous story as well. And that's what it's about, showcasing people who are courageous. So I just love all the beautiful people that I'm connecting with, and I've already had, wonderful conversations.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I've noticed as a podcast host, and I'm going to ask this of each of you guys, if you haven't got an answer yet because you might have been doing solo shows, that's okay. But one of the things that I find is when you start to interview people within a certain theme, you notice similarities. And so when you're talking about courage, I mean, obviously drawing from your story, and as they were sharing and drawing from theirs, were there some commonalities that you were able to identify that perhaps you can now share as an insight for maybe those people who are struggling in developing their own courage muscle?
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. And that's a really good point, because I always have a chat with my guests in advance of going, recording the podcast, because I want to get to know them. I want to see that they're a fit for me, I'm a fit for them, and also our listeners. And, I drill down to people, but when I interview them, I have the COURAGE acronym, and that's when it really drills down. And both Rachel and Michael had experienced suicidal thoughts. and just that absolute loss and grief. And I think grief is in anything. It's losing a job, it's losing a partner, losing a pet, just not knowing. That unites everybody. So there is that common theme of, I guess not feeling worthy or valued or not knowing where to turn to. And so, yeah, definitely that, I guess that feeling of being stuck and not feeling loved or courageous, and just knowing that there's a bit of hope and uncovering that courage muscle.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I know each of you, one of the reasons why you started the podcast, obviously you want to make a much bigger difference in the world with your message, which you are all doing, but obviously you've got a business that is tied to that as well. So just picks for everyone that's listening today and maybe even the recording later, if they are struggling, what sort of support can you provide people?
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. I've got absolute lived experiential business based around that, because even through COVID, I lost my full-time job, and that did dent my own confidence and self-worth. I literally had to pick myself up, and so I've got a 6-week coaching program, 6 weeks to a Courageous You, where we pretty much go through my Courage acronym, which is the strategy that I've got or I've used to get me through, my darkest hours. And I will disclose that I've never personally been suicidal, not myself, but we have experienced it through the loss of my nephew. So I've got my coaching, and I do have a couple of online health and wellness businesses. So yeah, that's what it's about. I've got a free Courage Blitz that 7 days, people are welcome to join that. And of course, I've got my podcast. Yeah, so I just love the fact that everything I do is all around healthy living, and that's spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, and now leading towards financially. So I know that, when people resonate with me, I can help them on their journey.
Fantastic. And Pix, how can people find your podcast? What's the best way to connect?
Well, the best way is on iTunes. So go to The COURAGEpreneur, COURAGEpreneur. That is all about being the courageous entrepreneur. Also, my website, excited that is going live. So pixjonasson.com, and that's got my coaching modules in there. So I would just like to say a huge thank you to this amazing lady, Anne-Marie Cross, who has been a pillar of strength and knowledge and inspiration to so many, each of us 4 ladies here. So thank you so much, Anne-Marie.
You are welcome, and thank you for sharing that, and much success. I know that you'll impact many lives with your podcast. So Estelle, let's speak with you, and you are, of course, the Desire to Retire podcast. Same question that I asked Pix. What inspired you to start this podcast?
Why a podcast? Look, I move actively in the local community that I live in, and I'd heard people say, Estelle, when you speak, people listen. And I thought, there must be something in that. So a podcast seemed the way to go for me. It's having your voice heard. I believe I've got some good things about life to share, and especially in my niche, the retirement market. It's a place where I live myself. I'm semi-retired, but still enjoy getting out there and meeting people and doing things, and especially supporting people who are struggling with where they find themselves in life at the moment. That's my speciality, is meeting people where they are at the moment. Yeah. And a podcast seemed to be a good way to go.
Yeah, we all celebrate you because, the Desire to Retire, many people that you are supporting are going through the transitions of, should I retire, should I not retire, what it's going to be like. They might have a spouse that there may be conflicting opinions and so forth. So you help them to navigate that. And one of the things that you had to navigate was, of course, the technology. So you really, and I think we can all vouch for this, especially Pix, because she's spent a lot of the journey with you too. You have just embraced that change and learning like a trooper, hasn't she, Pix? She really has. So you walk your talk, and so share a little bit about maybe some of the stories that you've shared on your podcast already, but just some of the pieces of content that you've brought to the air that can support people who are going through that transition.
I'd love to. Thanks, Anne-Marie. And I still, if I contact Anne-Marie, I always say, Anne-Marie, it's your digital dinosaur here, and she knows exactly who it is. So, but the stories, my retirement clients that I can share with you. I think of a gentleman who had worked his standard 65 years in the same company for a long time. Financially, he and his wife were very secure, and his idea of retirement was that he would play golf 3 times a week, and that would be great. After some time, he retired in the November, and by March he'd found that playing golf 3 times a week wasn't really doing it, and he and his wife were starting to be at odds with each other. I spent a little time working with the husband, and before he knew it, he realised that he had a communication problem with his wife. And it was all about where are we going to live in our retirement. And he very quickly rectified the relationship with his wife. And before they knew it, their house was on the market and they were moving interstate to be close to an adult son and grandchildren.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that you've supported many people. I would imagine that often, and this again is that transition, the unknown, the fear of, well, what happens if finally I do stop work? Who am I then? I'd imagine that identity and who am I when I don't have my work anymore, that's something that many people struggle with as well when they're thinking of retiring. Is that a thing to say, Estelle?
Yes, it's a question of finding your unique purpose in life after you finish full-time work and maybe you take up part-time work or you finish work totally. A lot of people I find in the stories they tell me, they decide to retire and they might struggle a bit, and then they find another purpose in life. For instance, a gentleman I met on Facebook, he shared with me how he started a publishing company and he now has 8 authors as his clients. He'd never dreamt of doing that when he was still in the workforce.
Yeah, and I bet you some of the responses, or one of them that often is common, is I'm busier now than I ever was when I was working full time. I don't know how I fit everything in. Is that what a lot of people?
That's exactly right, Anne-Marie. When you get to realise your own unique purpose in life at this phase of your life.
Yeah, what I love about what you've done is that you've brought your message, one that many people are struggling with, your expertise, because I know that you are a trained coach. And in a moment, I'll get you to share, Estelle, how people can connect, listen to the podcast, but also work with you if they're struggling themselves. But you've been leveraging and are leveraging a medium which you've been given feedback on. You've got such a wonderful voice, Estelle. Share your story. When you do, people listen. How often do well-meaning people that around us know us well say these things, but we don't necessarily take heed and leverage that. So again, just really want to honour you and congratulate you for that. Now, you also support people who are transitioning to retirement, whatever that looks like for them and whatever stage that they're up to. How can people get in contact with you and find out more about your podcast?
I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, and the website is retirementlife.coach, and I have conversations with people on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I believe if you go to the iTunes store, Desire to Retire is there as well.
Yeah, that's right. So she's across the main podcast players. What I love about what you're supporting people with, Estelle, is that you're probably the person that's someone who is struggling with the decision and how am I going to communicate better to my spouse that they need, but they may not realize that someone like you is there to support them and navigate that through, them through that situation. So so glad that you've stepped up, sharing your message and really supporting people in that way. So again, congratulations, Estelle. I just think you're amazing.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. You're the one who's been the guide, the coach.
You're most welcome, most welcome.
And she didn't break Canva in the process.
There was a little joke that we had that we were showing Estelle how she could use Canva to create graphics and things like that, and she was quite concerned, weren't you, Estelle? What if I break it? And we said, no worry, there's no way that you can break it. And then later on that day or a couple of days later, she said, I used it. And I said, great, well, I did too, so I don't think you broke the whole platform. So there might be a news flash. Estelle used Canva, shut down globally, the Canva platform, but it wasn't. So there you go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Estelle. All right, Aileen, let's bring you up to share a little bit more about your podcast and about why you started your podcast, which is called The Value-Driven Brand.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations to all the other ladies for the release of their podcast as well. But, you are a powerhouse, Anne-Marie, so we wouldn't expect anything less.
Oh, thank you, Miss Aileen. So share, value-driven brand. How did you come up with that? What's the message that you share on your podcast?
Well, hilariously, the way I came up with that was by sitting down with you, and as part of the journey for those who know when you work with Anne-Marie, and in case you are considering it, part of the journey when you start working with Anne-Marie is she takes you through what's called the Brand Archetypes. And I probably, out of the whole podcasting journey, that was the most poignant part for me, because what it really cemented for me was my brand message. And even though I knew, I thought I knew what I was about, that activity really just brought it home for me. And what we learned was that in the way that I do business, I really do take on this courageous hero front. I get out there and I fight for everyone, and I push them when they don't want to be pushed, and I, console them and then throw them back out into the battlefield again. So, I had this hero brand archetype, and we realized with a little bit of playing around that people got scared of that and maybe kind of pulled away. But what they didn't pull away from was when we came back to do it again, bless you, was that we adjusted it just a little bit, and we came up with driving value. And it was such an aha moment, because for years earlier, I had set up for my business a phone number called 1-800-VALUED. And when the word value and valued came up in my brand archetype activities, my head nearly exploded. And I said, that's it. That's what we are. We're driving value. So we're driving value through being courageous. We're driving value through performance. We're driving value through consistency and strategy. And so then this concept of the podcast, which had been something that I'd been talking to Anne-Marie about for 2 years, thanks to a pandemic, if not now, then when, is one of my favorite sayings. I finally was in a position to, put my feet on the ground and start running. And within a matter of a couple of months of some, pretty consistent efforts and some amazing mentoring from Anne-Marie, we released on the 21st of August the Value Driven Brand podcast. Yeah. And the premise behind it was, I come from a corporate background, and where the brands that I worked for were and continue to be some of Australia's most trusted brands. And it was my job to make them that. It was my job to make sure that you wanted to shop at Bunnings. It was my job to make sure you wanted to shop at Officeworks. And I took that very seriously, and I learned so many things that the average business person doesn't have the opportunity to be exposed to, that when I would hear from other companies that would market to small and medium and entrepreneurs, that, you know, to be successful, you needed this 10 grand software package, and you needed this and you needed that. You know, the reality was that I realized that you didn't truly need those things to become a value-driven brand. So what I set out to do with this podcast was to find people who lived a value-driven life through their careers, through their businesses, and through their lives, and help have them explain to people listening in how they did it without massive investments, without big dollars behind them, without, you know, 100 team members by their side, and yet still came out as amazing heroes in their industry. Yeah. And so now we're doing exactly that.
Yeah. And how many shows have you released already, and where can people find out more about how they can subscribe and listen to it?
Episode 17 gets released this Wednesday. So we release an episode every Wednesday. So just to get you through that hump day, that was strategic as well. And the best place to find it is iTunes or Spotify, or, you know, I'm a little bit of a greedy piglet when it comes to where you can find it. I tried to put it pretty much everywhere, as far and wide as I could.
Just so, Google it. But
yeah, Google. It's on Google Podcasts and pretty much everywhere where they don't have a commercial in between podcasts.
Yeah. Now we see behind you #CEHX, which is great because you're obviously doing some branded hashtags and things like that too. So value-driven brand. If you were to give a short synopsis of how you can support people, because obviously the valuedrivenbrand.com is your main website, but how do you support people?
Primarily, I support people. So it, as you can see, it says CEHX. I call that the joy of sex, which is customer, employee, and human experience. Mm-hmm. So I work with businesses all over Australia, helping them understand how to strategically deliver the customer, the employee, and the human experience that is going to set up the foundations for them to become a value-driven brand. And a value-driven brand is ultimately a brand where customers are loyal to you and have trust and faith in everything that you deliver.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think so important more than ever, especially since so many businesses are going online. We have to be far more intentional, far more mindful, because there may not be as much of that in person, but we can still use different technologies and just follow-ups and things like that that can still give some form of that human interaction, even though we may not be face-to-face. And so
absolutely. Yeah. There's no reason not to have a human experience.
Yeah, fantastic. Good. Well, thank you so much, Aileen. It's been a real pleasure and honor. And I still remember the day we were doing some brainstorming. I was kind of listening to you, and you were questioning, you were going, value this and value that and value this. And I'm thinking, what about value-driven brand? that's it. And all of a sudden, boom, off you go.
What a light bulb
What
moment.
happens
It was
when
quite
all of a
funny,
sudden
wasn't
you
it?
got that thing, that's it. And off you go running.
Yeah.
And here is someone else that is running. So thank you, Aileen. Here's someone else that is running an incredible business as well in the area of time. So Ildi, welcome. Tell us a bit about your podcast and why you are so passionate about the area that you are an expert in and obviously sharing on your podcast.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for having me here. It's been a while since we worked together on this podcast. Well, why? Well, my tagline is pretty much change your journey, make friends with your time. And I guess that kind of tells you everything, because this is all that I'm about. I've always I've done some extensive work on what makes me jump out of bed every morning, and I was just thinking about this while Aileen was talking, because in the end, if your business is not feeding your desire to grow and do something special in this world, then there's a slight disconnect. So I found that the one thing that actually makes me jump out is that journey, and I'm all about that journey. And it's really interesting because I found myself into this productivity space, while I always say that I'm kind of missing that organized gene. And if you look behind me, I think you can see that very clearly from my office. Obviously I'm in production mode, but still I'm really missing that organized gene. So everything and anything I do comes from the perspective of I know where you are at, and I understand that you might be struggling with exactly the same things that I used to struggle with. It's just that finding that solution is not that hard, and there's a solution for everyone. So it's a funny story, because in the middle of a divorce with 2 young children about 5 years ago, I created a planner just because I couldn't find the right one for myself. And one of my beautiful friends said to me, "Shut up and make one." So it's it was the beginning of something special, and that was the End Planner. And I built a beautiful brand around the End Planner. But this year has been all about change, and I realized that as much as I've been coaching time management and time mindset behind the End Planner, I had to realize that the End Planner is still strongly connected with the planner I created. So I'm not even sure if Anne-Marie knows this, but I actually separated a month ago the End Planner from my time management coaching. And that makes so much sense. So I created a parent brand, if so, which is The Time Fix. And my podcast is called The Time Fix. So it's a really interesting thing, because now that I'm thinking back, I think it started somewhere there when we were planning the podcast and the message behind it. I probably started to plant the seeds on what it just evolved into today. My podcast is all about giving you some snippets of better productivity, a bit of a tip and some tricks on how to overcome those daily issues that we all struggle with. You know, the big P's like procrastination and that sense of loss and the blockage that comes with it, and how can you actually get out of it, and how can you overcome those boundaries and find your own way to better productivity. And in the end, that's my passion. I love helping individuals and businesses to become just a little bit more productive through a different way of looking at time. Because in the end, we all have exactly the same amount of 168 hours a week. You can't add to it, you can't take away from it. It's really just how you relate to your own time.
Yeah, something that I was really fascinated with as well as we were working together, you identified that you had also recognized in people various traits that they would see time, manage time, do time, if you will, and you created some time archetypes. Share a little bit more about that, if you would.
Oh, it was an interesting thing because once I started to, well, let's put it this way. What I'm teaching is my own methodology. So about 4 years ago, I bumped into an amazing coach who just pointed out that you have a methodology, you just never ever thought about writing it down. So this is how I started to think a little bit deeper about how I see things and how I identify things. And the time management archetypes, there's about 6 different types that I talk about on a regular basis, because I do believe that everyone finds themselves in this scheme somewhere. You might be a survivor at this stage, but we all aspire to be an aspirer or a planner at least, because that's the place where you feel in control. That's the place where you can grow and not have the fear of falling back. But I also like to point out that even if you are an aspirer, at times you will be a survivor or a fighter, just because life happens. What really makes a huge difference is how do you pick yourself up, and how quickly can you get back into that controlled space where time is your friend and it's not your enemy, and where productivity works to serve you instead of you struggling to scrape things together and hold things together like you would be in that fighter mode. So I like playing with this model, and I always, with all my clients and workshop participants, I always put it out there, and I just challenge you to think a little bit about who do you think you are right now, and where would you like to be? And of course, that's a book in the making, Anne-Marie. So
yeah, well, that's what I love about all of you, in that, you know, you've got your own message, and that message is very much part of programs and coaching that you offer. It can become a book. I know, Pix, you are already a published author, international bestseller author, if I remember correctly. And it's great when you start to bring your message out that way, and it very much is focused too on how you can support people, because an integrated podcast strategy is just so powerful. And each of you I know, but before we move on, because I'm going to ask you each to share, because you created a gift, a special podcast series which people can access, that you walk them through various aspects of what you've just shared, of course. And so I'll get you to each to share what that is, and then how people can access that. But Ildi, if people want to find out more about the work you do, about Time Fix Podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the podcast itself, it's just like Aileen said, it's everywhere. You just have to Google the Time Fix. If you are more interested in the coaching side of things, and you just want to find a better way to look at time, then my brand new website is thetimefix.com.au. Please visit and leave me some feedback and connect with me. But if you are all about just having a great tool and you just want something that helps you on your journey, which is the End Planner, then it's endplanners.com. So on both websites, we will have a chance to connect and start a conversation, because in the end, time is one of those very personal things. We all know that we could do it a little bit more, but it's always hard to actually be open and honest about it and say, yep, I need help.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, time is a little bit, it's interesting. So I remember from one of my mentors, we would often look at time very much similar to money, and how often people will say, oh, I never have enough time, you know, this and that. Watch your language. What, you know, how are you reflecting, and what are you speaking over yourself when it comes to time? It can be very telling. So that's fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Ildi, for that. So we'll come back to you in a moment and then ask you about the series. And that, but first we'll step up, get Pix back on. So Pix, tell us a little bit about your podcast series, what it's about, and how people can access it.
Yeah, well, obviously I have the COURAGEpreneur podcast, but for the listeners tuning in today or the recording, I have a bonus free.
Oh, I think your internet is she breaking up for you guys too? Or is it just my end?
Yeah, she is breaking up, Anne-Marie.
All right, Pix, we'll come back to you. We'll let Estelle. Share how we can get hold of her podcast series and what that's about. Estelle, what's your podcast series about?
Yeah, well, it's going from woe, which is that awful feeling of not knowing what to do next about whether you should keep working or not working, going to wow, to experiencing that sense of freedom, of having a little bit more choice about what you want to do with your time and in the final phases of your life. You can find my podcasts at the retirementlife.coach on the behind the podcast tab. And if you go there, you find there's a quiz about am I ready for retirement? And there's also a wheel of life. And you can choose whether you want to tap into the quiz or the wheel of life. It just gives you an indication of where you are at the moment in regard to thinking about your future retirement or your current retirement.
Yeah, fabulous. And of course, what that looks like. Thank you, Estelle. And I know you put a lot of hard work into it as well, as I know that you did, Aileen, as well. Tell us a little bit more about your podcast series and how people can access that.
So we created a 3-part podcast series, and over the 3 episodes, I talk about what is a customer experience and, how that is different to what we all kind of believe is really customer service. And then we just kind of, over the 3 series, talk about how you can, at the very base level, create a value-driven brand. And like Estelle, I too also have a really cool quiz that you can open up and print off as well. And that is a more holistic insight for yourself to understand where you're at when it comes to creating a value-driven brand for your business and in your life, because one of the things that or the commonalities that we've already come to learn through doing the podcast is that so much of what drives us isn't just in business, it's how we live our life as well.
Yeah, fabulous. And I love the way that you've also created that quiz, and all of you as well, the podcast series, because, so often we hear something and it's like, well, great, how's it relevant to me? And each of you, and as you've just explained, Aileen, you actually help people. You start diving deeper into some of the aspects of that, and you've even through that quiz helped people identify out of each of the pillars, where are the gaps, where do you need to start working on first, so that you can then develop that value-driven brand. And then, of course, once people go through that series, you've got all of those wonderful interviews that you've done with guests already to be able to hear how that plays out as well through them. Fantastic. And that, of course, is accessible at your website, The Value Driven Brand.
It is valuedrivenbrand.com/podcast hyphen-series.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aileen. Ildi, what about you? Your podcast series?
Well, it pretty much it is the base and the first 3 episodes of my podcast. To be that honest, I haven't done anything special with it, but it was a great space to explain what this podcast is going to be about and where I want to head with it and what you will get out of it. And it all starts with 5 common time beliefs, because I do think that we need to think about time from a different perspective. And then, of course, I do talk a little bit about the time archetypes, because it is quite a nice way to put things in perspective and to connect with your time. And of course, the third part of this mini series is tips, tools, techniques that work and help you regain control. Because in the end, that's what we want. We want to feel in control. We want to make friends with our time, and we want time to work in our favor. And it's the whole podcast is designed to help you do all these things. And it just takes different aspects and showing you different ways of making friends with your fun.
And you are just so humble, Ildi. I know because I could see the work that you put into your podcast series. The things you share are real ahas for people, because until we recognize some of those beliefs that are not helping us, we can't change them. We can't go, you know what, I never even realized that. That's something that's just been happening over and over again. I didn't even realize that I had an opportunity to be able to challenge that and change that. And so it's always a great step forward, I think, when people gain awareness. So I certainly recommend that people go and sign up for that, because I think time, I mean, all of the areas that you speak about, but how often are we also, I wish I had more time? Well, you know what? You need to go and listen to Ildi's podcast, especially the series where she dives into, those common beliefs. All right, Pix, let's see if we can bring you back on. Your internet was kind of cutting in and out then. So what's the podcast series and how can people access it?
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. It's called the Trilogy of Courage. So it is a 3-part podcast series where people can actually learn how to connect with others, how to have courage, and how to communicate. So I love alliteration, as Anne-Marie does. So yeah, the Trilogy of Courage, and they can access that at my website, which is jonasson.com/podcast series. And they can download the wonderful tools. There's a quiz like the other ladies have developed as well. They can book for a courage check-in chat, a complimentary, no obligation check-in chat with me. They can do a resilience quiz as well. And there's also a word search. So I'm all about having fun, whatever I do. So you've got to have fun in life. So go.
You do. Now, we're just about at the end anyway, but I thought that I would just bring everybody on here. So I don't know, one of the things that I noticed from previous live launches that we do, and we just get to celebrate, each and every one of you. People were starting to go, oh, I need to get you on the podcast. Oh, we should do that. So I don't know, since now many of you have also done podcast interviews, are there any questions that either of you would love to ask of one of the people here that have just presented? The floor is open to do that as well. Does anyone have a question? I know we didn't rehearse. Actually, we didn't even plan what we were going to talk about today. I said, let's just do the launch. So who wants to ask a question of someone here? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first. I'll be courageous. I'm always open to interviewing people. Every single person on this planet, all 7.5 billion of us, are courageous. So ladies, if you would like, I would be honoured to share your courageous journey with my listeners and your listeners as well. So we shall connect offline. So that invitation is there.
Fantastic piece. Maybe each of you might want to also too, unless you've got a question or you'd want to share something. What are you looking for in a specific guest? Maybe your next, perfect guest is listening, or maybe your perfect guest is sitting here. What are you looking out for?
Yes, Anne-Marie, my clients, like I work with 55-year of age and older, from the nurturing professions, the teachers, social workers, health workers, and they are very short on time. They are time poor. So, Iliad, I can see that you would make a wonderful guest for one of my podcast shows.
I would love to, Estelle.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Fantastic. Good. Well, there you go. There's that connection there. And so time is great. What about you, Aileen? What are you looking for when it comes to the guests that come on your show, when it comes to the value-driven brand? What are you looking for specifically? Is there a secret recipe or something that really shines for you?
Yeah, there is. And one of the things that I'm really, really enjoying is I am finding more and more that people are coming to me to see if they are a good fit to join the podcast, which is just so amazing, rather than me having to go searching through, people are starting to hear it and they're like, hey, I reckon I've got a great message. So I specifically look for people who have run businesses or are leaders in a business and who have got a lived experience that shows that they've delivered value in a business or in a life. So we had, some of you might know, Dr. Linda Wilson. She was a guest on the show, and basically the premise is I want you to talk to people about how you create value without having to invest big dollars, because I really want to find that low-hanging fruit that all of us can use to create impact today without having to go to university, without having to find 10 grand, So people who have experienced those types of successes, they're my people. They're the ones I need to share their story.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got Dr. Suresh, who said change is something that always keeps changing, and it is a challenge. Ladies, nice to have your views. Ildi, I wonder, do you find, thank you, Dr. Suresh, for that wonderful comment. I wonder, when people are experiencing change, maybe change that has been forced upon them, do you find that that's an area that also can impact time and what happens as far as their day is concerned as well?
Absolutely. And I find that that's when we become very painfully aware of time. Because suddenly, just like Estelle mentioned before, you start a new business and it's a totally different world than being in a job. Suddenly you find yourself bombarded with lots of tasks and things that you've never ever done before. So I absolutely and totally love working with those entrepreneurs who are in that growth phase, I call it, when you realize that you can do more, you can become more, but how do you fit the more into exactly the same time that you had before? So it's quite a fascinating thing to do, because there is enough time, I can tell you for sure. There's enough time.
We just got to find it. Time fix, or listen to the time fix. And what are some of the things that you're looking at? Do you do guest shows, Ildi, or are you doing more solo shows?
Not yet. My podcast is still in the sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, sharing stories phase. In saying that, I do intend to because my podcast at the moment is every second week. When I'm good, I release a podcast every second week. Let's put it this way. Unfortunately, this is one of my most the busiest time of the year because of the planner season. So that did put a bit the podcast on the back burner, and I've been a bit slower in releasing episodes. But the intention is that every second week it would be a bit of a knowledge share, and every alternative week from next year it will be interviewing people
fabulous. That's a great way to be able to ask people, what are you doing? What have you done? And it's interesting. I love that, because there are different, as you know, there's different styles, and you call them that time archetypes. And what may fit for someone may, for others of us, go, there's no way I'm going to do that. I mean, I just share a little secret. I've tried probably every type of booklet and diary and everything, and I'm a quick start on the Colby scale. So it's like, to me, it's so that almost became a whole thing in and of itself to get it in the diary. Anyway, I digress. Let's just go one more time around the room and share. I'd love you to share insights, because now is no better time than to get your message out there. And something that I hear over and over again, there's no way that I could do a podcast. Who would want to listen to my message, my voice? So starting off with you, Pix, what would you to say to someone who has a message to share, is going to impact many people, yet hasn't done that yet because of, who am I? There's no way I can start a podcast. What would you say to him or her?
Well, they do have to have courage first and foremost, Anne-Marie. And you instill in us, it is message before microphone. You don't need that. You just simply need to have that message. And I love the fact that I get to share not only my story, but other people's stories. So just start. Reach out to Anne-Marie Cross, the podcasting queen, if you want to know the back end of doing podcasting, but just make that start, because I didn't think I could do it. I had that dream and that vision. I had that courage to keep pursuing it, and courtesy of COVID. So just go for your dreams, whatever it is.
Yeah, fantastic. Love that. Estelle, what about you? You've showed that no matter what age or stage you're at in your life, if you've got the determination and the courage to do it, it's possible. But what insight would you want to share just as we finish up the show today?
Yeah, and it is, as Pix has indicated, it is having that constant support, knowing that there's someone out there to back you up, and a podcast is certainly learning how to do a podcast. I've learned a lot about myself, my own strengths, my own weaknesses, other than my lack of digital experience. So there's a whole lot to be gained out of doing a podcast. And Anne-Marie is a person who says, I'll see you through till the end, and that's exactly what I've experienced. So thank you, Anne-Marie.
No, you're welcome. That's right, my commitment. I said to you when we started, don't worry, because you said to me, I will be with you every step of the way. You won't get rid of me, I said. Once you're in my circle of trust, you're in for life. Aileen, what about you? What last insight would you have for someone who may be thinking but isn't quite sure whether it's right for them?
I would say that finally putting my toe in the water and releasing this podcast has been one of the quickest ways to get my brand out there. And as I mentioned before, I now have people coming to me and asking, can I be a part of this? So what that shows me is that I am in itself delivering value enough that people want to be a part of it. And for me, that is my absolute brand purpose. And, I couldn't have done that without the absolute support. Now, Estelle, you think you've got digital like dinosaurism. Man, I was sweating bullets with Anne-Marie. I'm like, I don't get iTunes. I don't get it. I'm an Android user and I don't understand iTunes, but Anne-Marie was just absolutely amazing and a saint of patience throughout this whole journey. And I just want to say thank you so, so much. And if you're thinking about doing a podcast, just get out and goddamn do it. Just stop questioning yourself. Be that unique voice. There might already be, 100 people out there talking about the same thing, but that's not your voice. So put your voice out there and share what you know in your message to create value, and get Anne-Marie to bloody well help you along the way.
I learned some great phrases and that through working with you. No, just joking.
All very godly, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Ildi, what last words would you have for someone that's thinking about sharing a podcast but thinking, why would anyone want to listen to me? There's so many people that are speaking in this particular topic.
Well, you know what, I would rather approach it from a little bit of a different angle, because I think there's a lot of people out there who have a message, who know that it would be a nice platform, but the biggest stop is technology and the systems and how to tackle the whole job. And it feels almost like another job, if it makes sense. And that was me. I had clarity around who I was, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do with the podcast, and still the first 3 episodes turned out to be something totally different than what I originally planned and thought about. But that's just following a system. And I mean, for heaven's sake, why reinvent the wheel when it's already invented? So if you have that slightest thought, I would strongly suggest have a chat with Anne-Marie. I mean, it was the best thing I've done, and it was the best investment ever. It saved me so much time, so much effort, and it's such a beautiful, simple, easy to follow system, even if you are the self-taught type like I am. And it just and the support that you get, I mean, that's just priceless. I don't think that you can put a price to time. What you know, it's amazing how much help I got, especially in that last phase when it was all about technology, where to put it, how to put it, what to be careful of, what are the pitfalls, and all those things that you don't even think of until you are actually in it up until your neck.
And it's one of those things, once it's done, it's going through that. I'm the same. You know, if I want to do something, I'll go and find someone that has done that before, gone before, so that they've made all of the mistakes. Just as I recommend anyone who's listening or watching, if you're struggling in the area of wanting to be more courageous, you're looking at retirement, but you're not really too sure. You want to build a value-driven brand, but you have no idea, or you're constantly saying, I'm running out of time, or you're showing up late to places, you need to reach out to Pix, to Estelle, to Aileen, to Ildi, and get the support. Stop trying to do things on your own. Well, ladies, it has been so much fun. Thank you so much for to coming on. I know that each of you really has a passion to be able to share each of your messages in the industries that you are in. And it's just been a pleasure, and actually a pleasure and honour to be able to support you and be able to say, hey, I know someone who's got an incredible podcast in those areas, and I certainly will continue to do that as we head into 2021. So thank you, ladies.
Oh, thank you, Anne-Marie.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Congratulations, ladies.